Down here, things only get better with time. It's why we perfected the art of the scenic route, and why we also love a game that takes all day to play. It's why we know that when we welcome old friends again, everything that's great here will be even better. 'Cause whether it's a long walk, a long lunch, or a long-awaited hello, there's nothing like Australia.
Well, Panakan, Vandanam, Namaskara, Namaste. Very good morning and a good afternoon to our officials, industry leaders, entrepreneurs, delegates, and of course our panellists. From wherever you join us, a very warm welcome to this exclusive session on R&D and Innovation, particularly innovation for uncertainty. My name is Michael Costa and I'm the Australian Deputy Consul General based in Chennai. It's an honour to welcome you to the third day of the Tech and Innovation Trade Mission that's been hosted by the Indo-Australian Chamber of Commerce. Over the past few days, we've been exploring two-way trade, investments and collaboration opportunities and identifying new ways of working together across our respective innovation and technology ecosystems. We're all well aware of the impact of COVID-19. It's damaged economies, accelerated geostrategic competition and disrupted our way of life, not to mention the tragic loss of life and livelihoods. But it has also highlighted the importance of innovating with like-minded countries to ensure a safe, secure and prosperous future for our citizens. With India, one of our closest partners on science, technology and innovation, today we'll explore the impact of new technologies such as AI, 5G and Internet of Things, and the role of new age technology companies in ensuring multimodal connectivity, community development and digital inclusion. We'll look at innovative solutions by new tech companies to minimise environmental impact across value chains, and how business can better adapt to the changing climate and future pandemics. So I'd like to introduce you to your moderator. So Sunil Menon is the Network and Product Engineering Executive at Telstra. He heads the development, rollout and maintenance of next generation network technologies, including 5G and Internet of Things, to create one of the largest, safest, smartest and reliable networks in the world, as well as enhancing and maintaining Telstra's existing network platforms. He has over 28 years experience in the telecom and networking industry and has been in technical leadership roles in multiple leading technology companies. So finally from me, just some housekeeping. In order to reduce background noise, all microphones will be muted during the webinar, apart from the person speaking. At the end of the session, the panel will be taking questions. You can use the question section on the right-hand side of this platform. We are recording this webinar and the version will be available after the event to all participants and delegates, and it's also being live streamed on the IACC's YouTube channel. So that's all from me. I look forward to the insights from industry, academia and startups participating in today's discussion and working with you all to implement any recommendations. Over to you, Sunil.
Thank you so much, Michael. It's my pleasure and privilege to be the moderator for this session. We have an exciting lineup of panelists for this discussion. So let me start by introducing all the panelists. I'll start with Dr. Ashok Menon from the Civic Technology Center in Bangalore, India. Ashok leads the global efforts for LCA, sustainability analytics and reporting strategy for Civic. His responsibilities include leading global COE of life cycle assessments. His team enables Civic's carbon price strategy, climate roadmaps, validating sustainability-related marketing claims, and building a sustainable technology pipeline and circular economy initiatives. He has held various leadership positions in GE and Civic. He is a registered external PhD guide with IIT Kharagpur as well as with Manipal University. He is a member of the National Circular Economy Committee and the WF community of ESG practitioners. He has also served as the chairman of the India Life Cycle Analysis Conference 2019, and he is also on the board of directors for Civic Bangalore. Ashok has over 20 research papers in both national and international journals, and he has filed 4 patents to his name. He has a postdoctoral fellowship from the University of Minnesota and a PhD from the University of Mumbai, India. Welcome, Ashok. The next panelist that we have is Ethan Beanstalk. Ethan is the founder and CEO of Tech Bench Capital and Everything IoT, and a non-executive director of the Spark Festival and a member of the Australian Government AI Policy Pathway. With an entrepreneurial mindset and a solid record of over 2 decades in both global corporations and startup companies across Israel, US, and Australia, Ethan is focused on discovering, supporting, and investing in the next wave of sustainable innovations. His area of expertise include corporate venturing, venture capital, digital transformation, and new venture creations. His industry and technology experience span IoT, AI, RPA, digital media, and semiconductors. Over the years, he has successfully supported and invested in dozens of startups, including Nova Measuring Instruments, Propeller Aerobotics, InstaCluster, Aiken AI, and Change.org. Early in his career, he was responsible for the development of Intel Israel's incubator supported program, which resulted in over 1 billion increase in sales. He is an ex-national rowing champion and a current avid paddler in Sydney's beautiful waters. Welcome, Ethan.
Thank you very much.
Moving on to Nikhil. Nikhil is the Chief Innovation Officer and the creator of Nikhil's Lab, a unique incubator space within Tech Mahindra with more than 20 years of experience. Nikhil is also a World Economic Forum AI Fellow. He has been a researcher all his life and is now leading the growth of AI, machine learning, robotics, and quantum research within Tech Mahindra. Nikhil has actually designed an indigenous robot in his lab as a personal assistant, and his current vision is to enable machines to talk in local Indian dialects. As part of that, he is actually doing research on Sanskrit and how this ancient language could sow the seed for the next computer revolution. Nikhil has a master's degree in computing with specialization in distributed computing from the Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology, Melbourne. Nikhil currently resides in Pune. Moving on, and we have Ramadhyani from HCL, also known as Ram. Ram heads the data science and AI practice at HCL, and he has over 21 years of IT industry experience spanning across banking, healthcare, retail, and utility companies globally. He leads the AI strategy development, experimentation, and enterprise-grade rollouts for various machine learning and cognitive programs. He also leads the efforts for proposition development in the area of AI embedding in modern applications and enterprise consumption for ROI modeling and business value creation. So a big warm welcome to all the panelists, and a very good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all the attendees. So starting off, right, as Michael was saying, we are talking about uncertainty to quote and how innovation can help us deal with uncertainty. To quote Ilya Prigogine, who was a 20th century Russian physical chemist and a Nobel Prize winner, the future is uncertain, but this uncertainty is at the very heart of human creativity. As we kind of all aware, right, some of the recent natural calamities and socio-economic crises, and most recently COVID, have reiterated the uncertainty of the future and has made it very obvious the need for humanity to be resilient and actually leverage the exponential pace of innovation that we are all experiencing today to be better prepared for the uncertain future. Further, it has become evident that we need to have a more sustainable plan for human development while we continue to utilize the natural resources of the earth. The recent crisis actually has made industries worldwide today come to an inflection point. It has actually precipitated industries across the world to view innovation and technological advancement in a completely different paradigm. And they are actually adapting themselves to be more resilient and actually purpose-centric, thereby reimagining their whole business itself, right? Talking about digital technologies, even before COVID, digital technologies were actually rapidly changing the way we work, lived, and interacted with each other. But the forced isolation of COVID actually has in a lot of ways resulted in a huge acceleration of digitalization, including activities like telehealth, online learning, remote working, and e-commerce. So in fact, one can say that out of necessity, we have probably achieved in a few months, which might have taken us years to progress. What is important is actually not to lose that momentum, right? So how do we kind of leverage innovation to in fact, continue that momentum and even accelerate that, right? And as we look forward, we can see that we have to leverage the digital technologies like 5G, IoT, and AI in a more inclusive way, and at the same time, take greater accountability for our impact on others, society, and the world in which we live. Right? In the fireside talk yesterday between Dr. A.K. Garg from MeitY, from the Government of India, and Arun Kumar from Telstra, Dr. A.K. Garg indicated that actually India is aspiring to be a $1 trillion digital economy, and moving from the current number of 350 billion to be a $1 trillion digital economy in about 4 years by 2025. And that will amount to about 20% of the overall $5 trillion economy that India is aspiring to be, right? To reach those numbers, it is so obvious that the innovation engine really needs to be cranking to achieve that aspiration. So on that note, let me open up the panel discussion. So I'll start with a question to Ethan. Ethan, as we all have been talking about, the COVID-19 actually has had a profound impact across many industries, including travel, healthcare, telecom, and others. What, in your opinion, are some of the innovations which have been triggered or accelerated by this pandemic, which are going to have a significant impact on our lives forward and will make us better prepared for the uncertainties of the future?
Yes, hi Sunil, and hi everyone, and thank you for the invitation to participate in this important event. I actually want to start by focusing on the mindset change, the mindset, not the actual technology, and I'm sure we'll have time to a bit later on to talk about specific technology innovations, but the mindset, I think, had profoundly changed. And I'll give a few examples from my observation. Obviously, we're all aware of the working from home and how that overnight almost became a reality. I remember 25 years ago being in Intel as we were rolling out the laptop computing platform. We already wrote down working from home procedures. And actually in Intel, we had this policy of 1 day a week we can work from home. That was almost 25 years ago. So nothing new there. Technology evolved over the years, but obviously the COVID made it a reality overnight. So the ability to change mindset, to adapt, to be flexible is something that now is across the board globally. The second example I want to give is the idea that we've demonstrated that agile development and outcome focus is possible as well, and in many different parts of life. Starting from the end, from the problem, and affecting change in a very rapid way. So the idea that it doesn't need to be necessarily perfect. If we can make a rapid change and influence 80%, it's still much better than zero. And that's, again, it's a mindset change. And in terms of policies and governments, we don't need to if you look at social impact causes and how long it takes to make a change, we usually look at changing the system. If it's the education system or some part of the healthcare system, now the COVID taught us that we don't need to wait to change the system, because that will take a generation and that will affect the next generation, not ours. So we need to find a solution that will affect our generation as soon as possible. And another example I like to give is that of problem solving and how the pandemic brought people together. I happened to live in New York City at the times of September 11, and a little before, and I then came back after, and I noticed a very clear change of mindset in New York City, where people suddenly became much more friendly, much more helping each other, the community got stronger, and so on. So out of that, and the same thing I think we're going to experience with COVID-19. And the last thing is the idea of prioritizing and focusing on the right thing. I think that the tech obviously is being adopted much quicker, and I hope that will translate to climate change. We see the new President Biden, we see the activities of Bill Gates, and this gives me hope that as a global community, technology will be rolled out much quicker to tackle this massive problem ahead of us.
Thank you so much, Ethan. Very aptly said. Right? I think COVID actually, in a lot of ways, actually helped drive a big mindset change across individuals, industries, governments, and education institutions. Right? And as you said, instead of waiting for the system to change, I think we should see how can we drive that change. Right? And part of driving change is also kind of make prioritization and decision making. Right? So on that note, right, when we talk about prioritization and decision making, a lot of times to actually make the right decision, we also need the right set of data, right? So, Ram, I would like to pose the next question to you, right? Given the data-driven world today, right, access to data and the ability to effectively process it and actually leverage it to make decision making is very important, right? And during the COVID-19 pandemic, one of the major challenges that we had was actually lack of quality data. So given the learnings from COVID-19, how do you think governments, corporates, and citizens can actually be better prepared for these uncertainties of the future with respect to monitoring, gathering, analyzing, and managing data?
Sure, Sunil. First of all, good morning. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Sunil, for having me on this event. It's my pleasure to be here. Um, I like what Ethan talked about in terms of the mindset change that's so crucial. I think the uncertainty is driving the innovation in a big way during the COVID-19 scenarios that we have faced. Now, specifically with respect to data, it was very interesting to see what came out as we started to prepare to see how we address the issues that were around us. And what we saw was that there was a serious lack of unified, reliable, trustable data for decision making processes, for even planning, and so on. So it became very evident that there was, while there was a lot of attention, we call data as the new oil, or data being the source of insight and intelligence. What we did see was that uh, the ability to prepare for these scenarios required a lot of internal data to be available for enterprises. Similarly, for governments, it was important to understand citizen data and the ability to map scenarios. So, as we started to help some of the state governments in India, uh, the idea was to assist them in tracking COVID infections and the ability to map out the areas of infection and how do they uh, help the communities come together and also to help the administration to take action. Now, what we saw there was that it was important to bring these different sources together and to have unified data structures. And I think that's taken a big momentum. If you look at sites like data.gov.in or data.gov.au, the government is sponsoring a lot of collation, assimilation of data for public use, and that's a great step. Now, that's from a government perspective. Now, if you look at that from an enterprise perspective, a lot of focus has now come on to having data about employees. How do you know where your employees are, their safety, field force effectiveness. These are some of the things that we have started to see taking greater importance. Similarly, on the supply chain sourcing side, from a supply chain perspective, we've seen that there's a lot more focus on trying to find alternate sources of resources and to be able to plan uh, the ability to source products or services from different parts of the world. So these are some of the examples of how the data is shaping up in terms of how you take care of scenarios like these. And I think some of the larger initiatives, if you take a look at what the Big Data Value Association of European Commission is doing, they are looking at the ability to create a trusted European data sharing framework, and I think that's a great initiative in terms of how you leverage cross-sectoral, cross-industry uh, to data to interoperate and the ability to allow for innovation to happen on top of this open data environments that they're building. I think those are some of the most important things that we should focus on. Data is a living thing. Unlike applications grow, but data tends to grow. It can decay in terms of quality. So it's very important to treat it as a critical asset and to be able to leverage that for scenarios like what we faced.
Thank you, Ram. Yeah, I think, as you rightly said, I think treating data as a very critical asset, right, and then managing it as it grows and changes and morphs, right. I think we need a really well oiled machinery to be able to access that and manage it, right. So, talking about data, I guess one of the big societal transformations with actually data and identity that we have seen recently in India is the whole Aadhaar and associated India stack innovations such as UPI and DigiLocker, right? And further, the whole Atmanirbhar Bharat initiative has actually spurred many innovations for the highly diverse Indian economy. So, Nikhil, I would like kind of to pose the next question to you. How do you think some of the learnings and innovations from Bharat and I guess the India stack can be taken to Australia and maybe the rest of the world as well?
No, I think first of all, good morning, good evening to all, and thank you, Sunil, for the question, and thank you to the forum for having me. I think one of the critical points, I think Eaton has pushed on it, and Ram has really alluded to that facet. I think some of the learnings that happened during COVID-19 and learnings that can be taken from India to Australia have been two in my mind. One of them is, how do you develop a collaborative ecosystem between all players, which is the government, the academia, the industry, and even the civil society, to actually solve such kind of an uncertainty in a country like India, which has got fringe at almost every point, right? And geographical diversity at almost every point. So that's number one. Number two is, how was data utilized all across when this collaborative ecosystem was developed, and how data was essentially being made as the only source of truth to actually tackle this kind of a pandemic. And then there was a statement from the government saying whatever is not measured is not taken care of. And so you had to measure almost everything at a district level, at a city level, at the very core level of what India does. And I remember February 12th was the time when we got locked down. March we announced the lockdown, where we went into about a 90 days. One of the things that we did was, can we do a kind of a SEER model all across the country to say, how would this pandemic spread? India is not easy to maneuver and monitor. So you'll have to look at it. What is the susceptibility index? What's the exposure index? What's the infection? Before you actually even put up a lockdown over there, and you remove a lockdown and discriminate those areas. The second point was, what do you do to now help citizens while the lockdown is on? So do you have telehealth systems that can sit behind the government's contact tracking and tracing app? Can you have certain other measures that can be given to citizens, like a lockdown pass or an immunity pass, where they can travel during crisis times? And the third was, how do you now look at this? How do you fuel innovation in terms of the vaccine, in terms of drug research, and get that data in a collated sector, so that it's available not just with the government but also the private players? So I think that collaborative ecosystem is one thing that India showed the world that we can possibly look at it during these pandemic times. And having the truth around data was the second facet, and having accountability of that data amongst all departments, then while taking this kind of innovation. And I just want to recount stories to the listeners over here. During this pandemic time, the most affected population in India was the one which was at a lower economic level. Can India, or could India, give them some jobs while they were sitting in villages, and also allow them to come back while the lockdown was off? That was one of those social innovations that was done within India. Second, I would just recount some examples. I was fortunate enough to be part of Atal Incubation Center, and we were looking at school students who were doing this. One group of school students who live in a state of Madhya Pradesh had to travel about 45 kilometers every single day to attend their school. And the schools are obviously off since it was locked down. But this area also suffers from a large sector of malnutrition amongst kids. You call it scientific serendipity, you call it scientific fervor, but these kids actually dropped, or I don't know how they dropped it, but they dropped red amaranthus, green amaranthus, and bajra, if you may call it, on a piece of land. And the weed that came out of that system, they actually made some juice out of it. And that juice is supposedly given to kids now over there, which has taken care of 99% of malnutrition. These are innovations at grassroots level where the pandemic also pushed it. But this virtual platform that we are connected to also allowed us to look at those innovations and bring it to light to the urban sector as well. So, and that has been only possible because of that collaborative ecosystem that the government and the academia and institutions and corporates actually set up within India.
Thank you so much, Nikhil. It was fascinating to hear about some of those stories at the grassroots level, right? I think, and as you said, like innovation can actually happen at every level, right? I think at the grassroots level, the academia, the corporate, the startups, right? So talking about that whole ecosystems of startups, governments, and large corporates, right? Academic institutions are really an integral part of that innovation ecosystem as well. Given the pace at which our world is changing, one question that comes to mind, and Ethan, probably I would like to pose this question to you, is that how can we accelerate the translation of innovation from the academic world to real world applications?
Yeah, it's a great question, Sanil. I can only give some examples from my experience in Australia and in Israel. So, in my mind, universities need to take an active role. Very often universities are taking the back seat on that. They expect to be kind of invited. So what they do, they have often they have someone in the university responsible for industry relationships and industry partnership and so on. But that's not enough. They need to have much stronger engagement and proactive engagement. Some examples in Australia, for example, there's 4 universities. So I used to be director in a place called Cicada Innovation. It used to call the ATP Innovation, and that's an incubator that exists for about 20 years now in Sydney, and it's owned by 4 universities, the 4 main universities: UTS, Sydney Uni, ANU, and UNSW. But the idea of that place is that innovation, startups, research they have different programs to commercialize research and help those researchers understand what it means to try to develop a company out of the research. That's just one example. In Israel, it's quite well known. All the big universities have a major, what they call translation offices. And in many cases, there are different models, but in many cases, it's arm's length of the university. Those offices function almost like a VC firm, not so much like a government or like university establishment. And they are much more successful. They actually generate billions of dollars to the university from IP, from licensing, but very closely working with the industry and the larger investment, corporates, and so on, partnerships. I'll give just one example. Tel Aviv University, in specific, they have that kind of an office called Ramot. And Ramot have 4 distinguished activities. They have a fund. It's not a big fund. It's about $30 million funds where they actually directly invest in early commercialization of research. They have access to a variety of government support programs to do the same thing. They allow for industry sponsorship research. So different research that the industry is interested in funding and participating, they engage in that. And the last thing they do, they actually also have the ability for industry to contract a specific research that the specific corporate is interested the university to conduct. So this is just four example of four activities that the Tel Aviv University is doing to accelerate commercialization.
Thank you, Ethan, for sharing some of the instances from Tel Aviv University and how it is driving that acceleration by connecting with industry. So talking about the whole kind of innovation ecosystem and about uncertainty, right? Climate change is something which is there in everybody's mind today. Actually, the 21st UN Climate Change Conference of Parties, that is the Paris Agreement's central aim is to strengthen the global response to the threat of climate change by keeping the global temperature rise this century well below 2 degrees Celsius, right? More than 25 countries and large number of private sectors are committing to carbon neutrality by 2015. So, Ashok, I would like to pose the next question to you, right? How does one build an innovation ecosystem to drive carbon neutrality? What in your mind are some of the characteristics of such an ecosystem? And there are some examples that you could share, that would be great.
Sure. First of all, very good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all. Thanks, Sunil, for a very kind introduction. And I'll also like to take this opportunity to thank the Indo-Australian Chamber for inviting me for this event. So before getting into the solutions around the ecosystem, Sunil, let me put the things around carbon neutrality in perspective. Now, carbon neutrality means having a balance between the emissions of carbon and absorption of carbon. Now, if you look at the entire Earth is a natural carbon sink which tends to absorb carbon dioxide. Pretty much its forest and trees and plants kind of absorb it. Now, if you look at India's commitment to Paris Agreement, which includes creating an additional carbon sink by planting more trees so that it can absorb around 2.5 to 3 billion tons of additional carbon dioxide by 2030. However, this approach will not be sufficient when we look at the overall emissions that we are seeing today, especially India looking at 3 gigatons of carbon dioxide emissions being the third in the world when it comes to emissions. So another way of reducing emissions and to pursue carbon neutrality is to offset the emissions made in one sector by reducing the emission made elsewhere, actually. And this is where we talk about investments in renewable energy, energy efficiency, clean technology, low carbon technology, and this needs innovation. And more than innovation, it needs, as Nikhil had touched upon in his talk, an innovation ecosystem. Now, whenever it comes to climate, whenever it comes to carbon neutrality, the world across do look up to Europe, primarily because of the stringent regulations that they have put in place to drive carbon neutrality. Many of the policies and regulations are kind of making organizations drive or take steps towards mitigating the climate risks. And if you look at the European roadmap, in order to meet the climate neutrality, and it's not going to happen today or tomorrow, right? If you are planning to balance carbon emissions, it takes up to 2030, 2040, 2050. As such, China announced carbon neutrality by 2060. European Union is looking at 2050. And within the roadmap, they are looking at carbon capture and storage. They are looking at smart network infrastructure for energy transmission and distribution. They're talking about circular economy and energy efficiency drive across various sectors. And of course, two most important attributes are decarbonization of a transport sector. That's why you are seeing a lot of automatics moving into EVs, electrical vehicles. And eventually, we'd like to look at a large-scale decarbonization of the energy sector through electrification, and this could be done by adopting renewable energy such as solar and wind. For example, some quick examples, I'm coming from a chemical industry from SABIC. SABIC makes polymers, metals, fertilizers, and chemicals. So chemical plants do emit a lot of carbon dioxide. So we have developed one of the largest carbon dioxide capturing and purification plant, which actually captures carbon dioxide from one of the chemical plants, purifies it, and uses it for making chemicals and fertilizers. So eventually we are capturing this carbon dioxide and actually making it into a building block, a molecular building block for making newer chemicals, thereby preventing it from getting into the atmosphere immediately. Another issue that people have seen is the plastic waste. So again, here is again certain innovation that we have drawn, where we have kind of collected the plastic wastes and pyrolyzed it into what we call as a pyrolysis oil, which becomes a kind of a feedstock. So typically when you make polymers, you use fossil fuel. So instead of using fossil fuel, you could use a portion of this pyrolysis oil, which is being made by heating the mixed plastic waste and feeding it back into our cracker and what we call as circular polymer. And this entire initiative is called as a true circle initiative, wherein we are reducing the use of fossil fuel and providing recycled polymers, which is meeting the European regulations requirement. Now, when it comes to ecosystem, all this cannot be done by an individual, by one organization. I'll give one example. Here you would meet, for example, universities, like Ethan did talk about it, who play a role in developing concepts. You need venture capitalists who are looking at fundings. You need entrepreneurs and startups who are taking these concepts to commercialization level, and you need government and policymakers who can enable these ecosystems by in the way of providing subsidy or looking at most appropriate policy. And of course, corporate comes in, who could look at scaling up and implementing these outcomes to maximize the impact. Now, within Indian government, one of the great example has been, many of you might have heard about it, is the Ujala Yojana scheme. Ujala Yojana, actually Ujala stands for Unnat Jyoti by affordable LEDs. And the program here was to, within 3 years, provide affordable LEDs to almost all individuals, all villages and people across India. There were around 700 million LEDs within 3 years. And this would kind of bring about an approximate energy saving of around 105 billion kilowatt hours, as well as reduces of greenhouse gas emissions of 79 million tons. And I think this scheme is achieving a lot more. So an excellent way of bringing down across prohibitive material, making it reach to a common man, and overall helping climate, and a great example of innovation. Just last month, actually, Niti Aayog, which is the think tank of Indian government's policy making, they released an India Innovation Index, and they have been doing that for the last 2 years. And the idea here is to rate different cities in India based upon their innovation capabilities. And this is done by ranking the states and the union territories based on the index score, and primarily to recognize the opportunities and challenges, which in turn will assist in tailoring government policies to enable this. As a matter of fact, the last month's score showed the top 3 states in India was Karnataka, Maharashtra, and Tamil Nadu when it comes to innovation score. So these are some of the great examples of government, private sectors, and entrepreneurs coming together to kind of make a difference, bringing in innovation to make a difference to climate. Of course, there is still room to improve. When you talk about innovation, you do look at measuring it in different fashions, for example, different ways. For example, India, total number of researchers per million. This is a report from the World Economic Forum, which talks about around 216 researchers are produced by India per million. These statistics are much higher when it comes to Japan or US, which goes into 4,000 or so. Same is the case with the research papers, patent filing, and etc. More importantly, the R&D investment that we make, it's only 0.6% of our GDP, whereas other countries, the average is around 2 to 2.5%. There is still room, but I think the great work is being done in that direction. So this is how we would look at developing the ecosystem.
Thank you so much, Ashok. And I think, as you rightly said, I think each one of us have to do our part, right? As individuals, as governments, as industries, right? Do our part to tackle climate change and going carbon neutral, right? And looking for a circular economy, right? In fact, Telstra is doing its part in that context also. In fact, recognizing that we are one of the largest users of electricity in Australia, Telstra became carbon neutral in our operations in July of 2020.
Oh, wow.
And we have also made progress on new goals to enable renewable energy equivalent to 100% of our consumption by 2025 and reduce overall emissions by 50% by 2030. So, Ashok, coming back to you, right? What do you see are some of the opportunities for startups in India who would like to work on some innovative climate and environmental solutions?
Sure. So I feel there is an excellent foundation that has been laid in India to kind of start looking at startups. For example, there is a good funding mechanism in place, both international and at national level. Just to speak about a little bit of statistics, some numbers clearly state that India has more than around 20,000 startups, 280 incubators and business acceleration programs, around 200 global and domestic venture capital firms supporting homegrown startups. And of course, there is a huge network of fast growing angel investors that's also coming up. But if you carefully look at all these startups, I mean, from the tech startups, around 20,000, it would be around 5,000. And if you look at startups which is looking at environment totally, those numbers are at this point in time far less. Though maybe 20% of these startups in some way or the other would look at sustainability attributes, but these numbers are relatively less. Of course, government is trying to put its efforts to increase the let's say incubators to pumping in around $37 billion or so, the funding for climate is continuously increasing. Many of you might have seen in the news last November, Jeff Bezos announced names of 16 environmental organizations who would be getting the first chunk of the 10 billion climate fund that he has put aside. And these are continuously increasing. Because the climate has been in the forefront or in the news for last few years, it is taking time, but it's getting there. One example I can give, for example, SABIC, along with many other brand owners like Unilever, etc., have kind of come together to form what we call as an Alliance to End Plastic Waste. It's a non-profit organization which comprises of around 49 companies, and we have pledged around $1.5 billion to eliminate plastic waste across the world. And the way it has its headquarters in Singapore right now, and entrepreneurs and people can put proposals, and based on that they can get funding for climate related or plastics cleanup related activities. As a matter of fact, this organization has already funded 5 projects in India in terms of looking at Ganga cleanup. There's a project going on in Pondicherry and Agra. The idea here is to kind of prevent plastics from leaking into the environment, collecting them before it leaks and converting them into useful product. Thereby you are able to mitigate the climate emissions risks coming out of the various emissions, I would say. So it's growing. A lot of opportunity exists, and I do see in next 5 years a huge chunk of the existing startup funding going in this direction.
Thank you, Ashok. So I think as we kind of talked about, I think given the vast I guess numbers and size and dimension of India with more than 1.1 billion people, diversity in languages, cultures, economic levels, and people having varying range of access to resources and other myriad complex dimensions of diversity. The question that comes to mind, in fact, Nikhil, I would like to pose this question to you. How does one bring innovation to the masses in such a diverse country as India? What are some of the tools to democratize innovation, if you will?
No, I think great question, Sunil. I think one of the biggest tools to democratize innovation within India is the language itself. And I think for our listeners, if I may, India is a land of 27 mother tongues and 1645 dialects. And I don't think any Cortanas and Googles and any other Alexas play a part in connecting a man to a machine. When we are saying that India basically goes on from its journey today to the digital front, a large part of Bharat needs to be connected to India. And when I say Bharat, that's the rural part of it connecting to the urban sector. And that has to happen through a democratization of languages and putting through digital intent on those languages as well. Now, and we see this, and we see examples of this and problems around this in everyday life as well. If you happen to travel in India, after every 50 kilometers, you would see a change in that language dialect. And that's why those 1645 dialects come into being. I happen to notice it very closely because my wife teaches virtually and she teaches coding to students virtually. And you also get students from rural sectors, but you also get students from urban sectors as well. What you find is a slight change between these students is that students who have not been properly trained in English will have a problem in understanding concepts as well. And those concepts really resonate in terms of their marks, etc. So that gave us an idea. And at Makers Lab in Tech Mahindra, we have taken this as head on and we have actually created a kind of code editor called Bhamal, or we call it as Bharat Markup Language, which enables kids across the country to actually code HTML in 12 different languages, because we think that if kids can actually code IoT, can code HTML, can code certain bits of data structures in the rural sectors, and there's a large amount of innovation happening in rural sectors, in order to get them to the digital intent and democratize technology, I think one of the things is basically putting them into that language which they can code. We also took this editor to Australia and New Zealand, and that editor also has some approach in Maori as well, so that kids in New Zealand could also utilize Maori to code in their specific languages. So if you look at the country side of Australia or the regional Australia as well, that can also utilize from this particular effort of ours. The second part of it, which essentially India needs today, is a collated data exchange, which is about anonymous in its structure, but also a large part of distributed data being collected as well. Today, India, from an agricultural point of view, is a land of very, very small farm holdings. They're not large farm holdings as well. But can you give that small farm holding or the holder the ability to understand what is the temperature that he's going to do, what is the predictability of the crop yield, what's the soil, what's the mineral characteristics, where would he or she find a kind of close by basins where water could be done. This was a part of an effort that we did along with the Principal Scientific Advisor's Office in India, where there is an app now which is made for 140 million Indian farmers, where they can actually look at it in different languages, but you can also understand from their location point of view what's going on in that small region and small place of their farm holding as well. Then third, in how you democratize is democratizing health data as well. And that is basically saying that epidemics like these or zoonotic viruses like these, which actually jump from animals into the human sector, are going to increase as we go forward. Can we essentially have that kind of health data exchange around India, which is anonymous, and can actually form a kind of stack, as we mentioned the India stack before. The India stack for everybody is a JAM stack, which is Aadhaar, Mobility, and Jan Dhan, which basically says that I can actually give certain credits to the people at certain sections of society. Combining all of this, making it democratic as an access to everyone, but then keeping the ideology of responsible technology would be what India's innovation would be all about, and what we can do within the sector of India at such diversity. There's a saying that AI is the new electricity. There's a saying that data is the new fuel. Our saying, which I want to percolate across and tell people, is while these two, when they two meet, we should have less pollution. And that less pollution is going to be through different measures that corporates can take, the government can take, to actually put up a kind of a governance structure around what we can do with data and put out that data exchange as well. So I think that those are some of the things that India can do, and we can take it to the rest of the world as
well. Thank you, Nikhil. Some really fascinating kind of stories and data points that you shared about Bhamal and the farmers' application and then health data, right? I think, as you rightly said, I think bringing it all together and using it in a responsible manner to scale innovation for the masses is what really is the call of the hour, right? So, talking about again, coming back to sustainability and the efforts that we can actually take to reduce the precipitation of some of the natural calamities due to, I would say, human action or inaction. Disasters and calamities are something that we still have to be always be prepared for, right? So Ram, coming back to you, right? Talking about technological advances in disaster and crisis management, one area actually which comes to mind is actually cognitive computing. So how do you think that some of the recent advances in cognitive computing can be used in disaster management and emergency handling?
Yes, well, in terms of disaster management, I think the first thing is to try and see if you can avoid a disaster. The second is the preparedness for a disaster in terms of how ready are you if things were to happen, and which they always do. So what we have seen is that, like we touched upon earlier, the need for consistent way of handling data is required, and that requires commitment. I think the foremost thing with respect to using AI or any technology is that you got to have a commitment towards data. You have to have a commitment towards the fact that you need to be prepared for the next pandemic or epidemic, if you will. In terms of the usage itself of AI for disaster management, what we've seen is that it needs to address a couple of different facets. First is fundamentally the physical well-being. How do you assist in the physical well-being of employees, of citizens, of students, of children, and so on. And what we are increasingly seeing is that the more access you have towards data, you can model your environments better. So when the pandemic happened and HCL set up this task force called as ECMT, which was Emergency Crisis Management Team, and its primary objective was to be able to predict things way out 3 months from now, to see how we can give assurance to our customers in terms of consistency, in terms of delivery, the ability to support our employees better. So we went to a point where we were able to actually say which part or which district of India where our employees located, because a lot of people had traveled home. So it no longer made sense to run BCP or DR exercises in your buildings because there was nobody, and people were really spread out. So the old notions of what BCPs and DRs were did not really matter here. So we had to actually get down to a point where we could trace every single employee to the different districts. We started predicting the spread of the virus in each of these different districts by modeling with data from JHU, and they did a fantastic job of keeping reliable data. But JHU was more at a international level, at a country roll-up. We used a lot of data from Ministry of Health. So these were some of the examples that we were able to trace down everybody, every single employee across the country. The second thing we did was that while some people did have to come into the workplaces, we could actually use IoT combined with the data that we were having at an enterprise level to actually know which employee of which project in which center is in which ODC in real time. So we were able to actually put out maps of where our employees really were. So it gave a great amount of value of data to assist the employees in assuring them the quality of environment that they were working in, the need for support staff to be there. So those were examples of how we were able to bring the likes of IoT mixed with machine learning modeling capabilities for ourselves. The second part was in terms of the psychological well-being, and we did enormous amounts of surveys and the ability to manage sentiment analysis, not only of our customers but of our each and every employee, to see what we could address. And that was a key success for us to get through the pandemic. We also did detailed monitoring. So we monitored social media. We were able to monitor alerts from across the globe, used geospatial data to see what sort of an impact any scenario might have. So while the pandemic was on, there were still incidents of fire, there were still incidents of other issues that were being dropped over us. So using the ability to use geospatial data, alerts from different systems and subscriptions that we had, the ability to put out these simulations of what would happen in a certain scenario and to equip the business better was something that we used. Now, what we also saw was that there is a need for the ability to work for our customers. So we help a lot of our customers in terms of planning their supply chain, and it was seriously hit, especially for pharmaceutical companies, for drug manufacturers, for life sciences teams. For them, the big challenge was in terms of supply chain, both at the sourcing end and also at disbursement. So we took care of some of those using the same methods that we used for our employees to be able to predict the demand for a certain vial, a certain drug in a certain district or in a certain state of the US, and to be able to channel these resources better. So those are examples of how you can combine the abilities of data, IoT, and machine learning intelligence to be able to support business in real time.
Thank you, Ram. And I think that's kind of articulated in terms of one can use various technologies like IoT and machine learning and cognitive computing, right, to kind of solve problems. So talking about IoT, Ethan, what I would like to kind of get you on this is one noticeable global phenomenon is the concentration of people in cities and urban agglomerations, right?
Yeah.
And it's a common knowledge that people tend to live and work in an urban setting because of the available opportunities. Taking that into account, right, the government of India has launched the Smart Cities Initiative in 2015. With your experience that you have actually gone through in some of the smart city initiatives in Australia, and you're using technologies such as IoT and machine learning for driving and launching some of those smart city initiatives, what do you think are some of those learnings which can be applied in India? Of course, the scale is much bigger, but I'm sure there are things which can be scaled to those levels as well.
Yeah, sure. It's interesting that you mentioned the program started in 2015, or the initiative, and that's exactly the year I started with Everything IoT. And I did Everything IoT because I wanted to bring corporates, startups, government, academia, all together to one place to accelerate the adoption of IoT. And frankly, it took much longer than what we all wanted or predicted. And so I think the intention was there back then, but we were still waiting for communication technologies. 5G is now starting to be rolled out. Standards, interoperability, different things still needed to happen for a mass rollout. However, looking at what's actually, have we achieved already, I kind of distinguish between kind of basic projects, stuff that many cities have rolled out and in the process of rolling out, to more advanced, so in other words, more specific use cases. So on the basic stuff, using of CCTV cameras in the entrances of cities to understand people coming in and out, numbers and so on. Also for crime, of course, visual recognition technology is very advanced those days. Many countries around Australia have gone into the smart street lights, LED lights. Some cases they even have sound sensors to pick up the noise, but actually even to pick up for example, in different parks, you have smart lighting with sound sensors that can alert the police if somebody is in distress. You have example, of course, of parking, lots of different parking technologies, whether it's sensors on the ground, in the road, or cameras that can identify exactly where parking spots are available and where they are not. That is congestion of traffic, diverting drivers to where parking is available. Of course, we have waste management application, we have water resource management, smart irrigations in parks and public spaces as well. So all those are kind of IoT technologies that affect everybody in the city, in the urban space. But to give some example of what I call more specific use cases that solve most isolated problem, I picked up just a few in Australia. So there is a flood road smart warning system. So in the city of Logan in Australia, they roll out the system that basically have smart signage that alert drivers to stay away from areas where they predict flooding to occur. As we know, flood is something that happened very quickly, and often drivers get caught in the flood zone. So that's one example. Another example is smart decision making regarding solar installation. So technologies that can help the council predict the efficiency of rooftop solar system, and then obviously direct investment and installation in the areas where efficiency is much higher than other areas. Actually, talking about Telstra, I just happened to have a friend that managed a product of Telstra which uses the Wi-Fi. So Telstra has Wi-Fi installation all over the country, and the product is such that it can report on movement of people. So we don't know who the people are, but we know how many people are now moving into Bondi area, for example, in opposed to Darlinghurst or the CBD and so on. So up to the level of a street, they can predict or report. And of course, this is very essential in the lockdown or the pandemic and so on. And the last example I want to mention is a project that has been done in not too far from where I live, around Bondi and Coogee. So this eastern beaches in Australia, eastern suburbs beaches, I would say. And they had the more holistic approach, those council, to put sensors that really enhance the experience of the visitors. So they can report on the parking, on the Wi-Fi availability, CCTV cameras, even there are sensors in the barbecue facilities, in the bins, and cameras that detect the surfing condition and so on. So it's more a holistic approach to go, this is what's happening now in Bondi Beach or in Coogee Beach and so on and so forth. The biggest project, and that's something I'm sure very applicable to India, is in transport, where the New South Wales government have invested billions of dollars in the last 5 years in autonomous city rail, light rail and heavy rail, but autonomous, connecting more suburbs in the city center. There are just examples of some projects that already were implemented in Australia.
Great, thank you, Ethan. I think some of those kind of initiatives I can definitely see kind of with parallels which can be used. But I think, in fact, the last one that you said about semi-autonomous transport for the kind of city area or waste management, right? I think that's a big area, big problem all cities in India are tackling, right? And if IoT can be used in that context, right, I think that will be a real lifesaver, right? In fact, as you said, I think Telstra is involved in many of these initiatives, right? Some of these, the smart waste bins, the parking, traffic management. In fact, that we are looking at right now is also using sensors for what we call smart pitlets. Again, given that Telstra has got a lot of these pits across the country, right, millions of them, and a lot of times a displaced one can actually be a health hazard for pedestrians. We're trying to see how technologies can be used to alert that, and then so that we can take a very timely and proactive action to kind of fix those issues, right? So I think kind of we are probably running out of time. I just want to kind of pause and see if there are any questions At least I don't see anything in my screen. I don't know if the organizers, are there any questions or raised hands that we should be taking at this point? Okay.
So there are no raised hands or questions we have. If you can check.
I do see one question.
Yeah.
I think that the question is from Navarathan Kataria. The question is, any reason why not too many innovations being tried in solar? Who would like to take that?
Well,
Go ahead. Yeah.
I probably have only a partial answer, and the partial answer that from what I observed, there was a lot of innovation being put into the efficiency of the solar panel, right? And I also saw a lot of innovation in the rolling out model or financial or business model, where in Australia, there's a lot of companies now doing really well in financing those installations because the customers don't want or don't have the capital to invest in a new solar panel, so those companies offering it as a service. For example, we will fund the investment, the installation, and the service, but you're going to pay us per energy use as a customer. So I see a lot of innovation in these kind of models.
Okay. Thank you, Ethan. Any other questions? I guess one thing we didn't probably touch upon is actually kind of one of the biggest technological changes which is sweeping across the world is 5G, right? And in fact, 5G, as we know, is a unifying metaphor, and it probably includes a lot of the technologies that we talked about, right? It kind of basically brings about pervasive and reliable access, IoT at scale, hybrid cloud and security to unlock newer capabilities for consumers and enterprises alike. And it's probably going to have a plethora of game-changing uses, right, including smart cities, education, remote healthcare, patient monitoring, supply chain tracking, autonomous vehicles, smart highways, smart agriculture, mining, drones, etc. Right. So I think that will kind of be pervasive of across the entire human society. Right. I know we are kind of coming to the end of the session. If there are no questions, maybe we can just wrap up. So probably I would like to say that the future may be uncertain, but it's definitely a very bright one. Is what I can say, right, based on kind of what we heard from some of the panelists and the experts, and kind of the views that we can hear from experts in the industry as well as from the academia and startups, right? That with the collaboration across all these players in the entire ecosystem, I think we have a great story of how we can fuel the innovation engine, which will take us to a really smart and bright, highly connected and secured digital future. That's probably what I would like to close with. So thank you again, IACC, for actually bringing us together and giving all of us this opportunity to share our views and interact with all of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.